Could the panelists come?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. We need one more. No worries. Oh, yeah, I might need some water too, but let's see. So you need more coffee. Thanks. Oh, I appreciate it.
How can you live in Finland? How can you live without coffee?
Yeah, thanks for being here. The last discussion of the day. Hopefully everybody is still awake. In a half an hour, we need to solve the problem of how can we as Nordic countries, and I say we, I'm Dutch, we often really want to belong to those Scandinavian countries because... Yeah, that is true actually. Like in every metric, you often see like we're fifth or sixth, and always the ones who are above me are always the Nordic countries. So I talk about we, but how can we as Nordic countries maybe work together to push and disseminate precision fermentation, cultured meat, alternative forms of meat. First of all, there are two people here already who were already on the stage, but maybe there were some people leaving or were not taking notes. So I would like to have you yourself introduce yourself, and I would like maybe you can tell a little bit of story. So keep it short. But what was the first time you were introduced to alternative meats and were thinking, this can be big? And let's start with the one who wasn't on the podium, Elena.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Walden. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at GFI, which has been mentioned a few times. So if you don't know us, we're the leading non-profit think tank focused exclusively on accelerating the alternative space. And as a testament to this panel discussion, we are significantly ramping up our work in the Nordics as of now because we see the potential, particularly from the R&D side of the space. To answer your question, I think I was having a think about this before. I think it's when I was going to dinner with a friend who is like probably my most green friend. Like she never flies. She takes all these like elaborate train journeys around Europe. And we were going for dinner for the first time, and she just didn't hesitate. She ordered the meat, and I've been working the meat dish, and I've been working on this topic long enough not to say anything because it's a very good way you lose friends very quickly. But it just made me realize just how strong and how exceptional food choice is. Like it's so ingrained in our habits, and it's something people are just not willing to compromise on. So for me, that just makes the theory of change around alternative proteins so much more compelling. Like we need to change how we make meat and not rely on people giving up meat. So I think that's for me.
Very quick reintroduction. I'm Sagar from a fund called Beyond Impact. We are investing globally in the space and around aligned areas. I've been a vegan for the last 11 years myself. Actually, my journey was might be called bizarre in some ways because I was a feminist first, and then I read a book by Carol J. Adams called The Sexual Politics of Meat and the Pornography of Meat. It was like, if you're a feminist, you need to be a vegan vegetarian. It does not make any sense. There's the whole concept of ecofeminism that I came across. The second piece of the puzzle that I really started thinking was, I was doing impact investing, mostly in emerging markets, and I was looking at a lot of these DFIs, development finance institutions, Nor Fund, Swed Fund, Dutch, DGGF, they all invest in emerging markets, and they were investing in aqua farms, animal husbandry, because that's how you give more and more jobs to the smallholder farmers. And I was like, I'll do everything in impact investing. I won't touch agri and food at all. So at some point, I read a book by Paul Shapiro. I was like, So I come from a little bit of research field, and I was like, can I combine research and impact? And I was like, start thinking about, it would be good to actually have this odd protein and stuff. And then I started looking at this space and start doing some stuff in 2018, but properly start mobilizing more capital from 2022.
Thank you. Yeah. Great stories, actually.
I can take this one.
You have your own.
I have my own microphone.
See, rightly so. Well deserved.
So I will not introduce myself, I just gave the talk, but then the first moment when I recognized that alternative meat would be the game changer is, it was actually way before COVID times. We had Golden Green in Finland, and there was a lot of, discussion around Golden Green. It was a meat alternative product which contained both oats and faba beans. And it was so difficult to get it. It was going to the supermarkets and voila, off in the next 5-10 minutes. And we really needed to hunt, and being a food professor and my husband is a consumer scientist, so we were like, we need to taste this. And it took us, believe me, 1 month to get access to Golden Green edition, the first edition of Golden Green. So that was the moment that, hey, look, this is going to be big thing.
And this impact is going to be big. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what I really liked about your two talks, actually, in the environment of WePlanet, we can often be quite critical on Europe and how slow things are, and we can be a little bit whiny, maybe even like Europe is lagging behind. But you two were quite positive about the dynamics in Europe. You're especially, if you compare it to Singapore and the US. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, I see myself more as a outsider in some way. And then you start having the outsider perspective. So last year when I came here as a 90-day Finn, invited by Helsinki partners here in the city of Helsinki, I got amazed, and I was telling somebody from Anu from VTT that we actually don't know so much about VTT outside Finland actually. And then SNIFTEF, which is in Norway, and then Food Biocluster in Denmark, and Swedish universities are also doing so much of stuff. And when you actually look at it, groundbreaking innovation. So I say 4 things which are happening in this region, probably more in Nordics than I would call it in whole of Europe, but in this region very specifically are around customers are asking for it. There is a consumer demand, I would say. It's not going down. Overall, if you look at Lidl has probably the most amount of SKUs in the Nordics, specifically in Helsinki is pretty good. The Lidl is launching their own products right, left, and center. Then consumer demand is there. I would say corporates are quite conscious, and I was saying to someone else also, and corporates, I don't mean that all corporates are evil. Some might be, some might not be. But a lot of family-owned businesses have been, because they have also reached that trajectory of some are 30, 40, 50-year-old, and specifically in Netherlands also, this whole Northern European belt, we have seen a lot of family-owned food businesses have been rethinking themselves. Like I've seen with Fazer, like nobody's asking them to release vegan gummies. Like most of the gummies here are non-vegan anyway. But I was talking to somebody at the family level, and they have been thinking about it. So there is some consciousness among the corporates, which is I've seen here more than anywhere else. The third piece of the puzzle, I would say, is actually, if you look at it, Nordics, and if you look at the Northern European belt, you look at Netherlands also, it's one of the highest in the human organs on chips. We have sadly not invested, but it's something, a lot is happening there because of the biopharma industry and all of this. This has the highest research per capita. So if you are talking about science-based innovation, where it's going to come from, where you have highest research per capita, and specifically because of Novo Nordisk in Denmark, AstraZeneca in Sweden, and because of University of Helsinki, Turku has so much effort going around, and VTT, so much effort going around life sciences. You see the same thing with Netherlands also. So then you have innovators here, like researchers are here. They are innovating on stuff. And the last leg, I would say that, which we keep criticizing, is the regulators. But at one side, yes, there is, and I was telling a lot of people that please read a book by this Finnish author who teaches in US called The Brussels Effect, which is basically how Brussels actually affect the whole regulatory landscape globally. It's like her point was that it's not US is actually controlling the world, it's Brussels who is controlling the world. So if you can actually move Brussels in the right direction, you could have good regulators actually looking and copy-pasting everywhere. So you need to have these whole 4 quadrity moving around. So regulators here are conscious about climate impact. They are in the most green zone, if I say. The problem, and what I have been trying to understand as an investor is, what happens is, US regulators are more business friendly, so you get regulations out of the box very quickly. You don't self-acclaim grass and all that. Singapore and all of these are, first of all, very small geographies. They don't have so much influence, so it is good enough to have as small as a launchpad, but it's a fun sandbox, but nothing gets scaled up. But then EU regulators are very first on the consumer side. So when you're trying to defend the consumer, so there needs to be a trade-off. So the businesses sometimes get a pushback. But because of that, a lot of times innovators get pushed back. So how can we find that balance? I think if you can, because if there is consciousness, if there are regulators thinking in the right direction, how we can actually nudge them into the... Yeah. Because if EU does that, EU does that, then US will copy-paste fundamentally everything. All the emerging markets will also copy. Then, yes.
So, Lena, do you agree with this mood, this more optimistic mood? Maybe you can also elaborate a little bit on the mood in Brussels. Who is pushing and who is holding back?
Yeah, it would be weird if I was like, no, there's no optimism at all. I'm working for GFI Europe, but no potential in this region at all. No, I agree with everything, and especially the Nordics just seems to bring together all of the strengths that Europe has as a whole. Like when we at Good Food Institute are doing our global strategy, Europe is so central to the R&D function of that just because of the strengths of our universities here and the strengths of the kind of academic communities. And I mean, Napkin is a great example of how that's just improving and improving. So yeah, so much optimism in the region as a whole. I would definitely agree with everything Sagar just said about regulation. There's a lot of talk about regulations, this big boogeyman, it's horrible, it's so slow. Yes, to an extent, but I think there's so much that can be done by just, funding EFSA properly. These aren't big things. Putting a school in Parma, apparently. That's not been on our policy recommendations, but maybe it will be. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's not... we are very cautious at GFI about saying that we need to tear up the whole regulatory framework. That would be an absolute nightmare. These companies need stability and certainty as well. And also careful what you wish for, because coming on to the second point of your question, it's been a bit of a tricky few years in Brussels. I mean, there is a very well-oiled, well-coordinated opposition to alternative proteins, and they have been in the crosshairs of the Italian government particularly, and they are very much manipulating and leveraging all of the processes in the EU to push their case and just essentially try to kill the regulatory path to market for these foods. One concrete example, just to show you kind of how this is being pushed. So earlier in the year, there was a letter or a note that was pushed by the Italian government, and they pushed it through the Agricultural Council of Ministers in Brussels. And the note was framed like, we support European food, basically. It was incredibly innocuous, and hidden in there was stuff about changing the novel foods regulation. So 16 countries signed up to that because it was hard to not agree with how they framed the note. So it's very much that kind of using these kind of loopholes or trying to get this on the agenda in a way that doesn't seem very controversial, and always pushing it through the agricultural ministries. So what I'd say for the Nordics, and what the Nordics can do, is really to provide a bit of a counter voice to that, because at the moment in Brussels, it's really the loudest voices are the ones being heard, and there's not really anybody opposing that. So Italy and Austria are very, very well organized. They get coalitions together. There's not really an opposition to that. And I think the Nordics specifically could play a massive role in getting the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries. We know there are supportive parts of governments, but they're not shouting very loud at Brussels. And we know that the Commission has, for example, made funding decisions based on the fact that member states are not supportive. So we need more of a debate to show the EU institutions this isn't black and white, basically.
So Nesli, you need to speak up. You're too silent.
Yes, I will. Actually, I was just, when listening, at the same time thinking, of course, when we look at the two faces of the coin, I mean, there is, of course, those more, so to say, the traditional countries like Italy and France has been really pushing things down compared to the Netherlands, and also in Finland we have 4, which is focusing on actually fermentation-based solutions. Well, 3 fermentation, 1 insects and 1 plant-based from VTT. But then I think the main thing that we should also, I keep coming to this societal readiness level, because I see it as a big hurdle in not only here, but also beyond the Nordics. The food culture is also quite important. So if you look at France and Italy, very heavy, very traditional food culture. Again, I will give an example from this Giant Leaps project. One of the surveys that we have done was in Switzerland. And we couldn't even ask to the consumers alternative cheese. No. We were set that, we technologists, we said we have to understand, the consumer landscape with the alternative cheese. And then we were told that is so holy in Switzerland, no one can talk about alternative cheese. And as you know, in the dairy products, cheese is the most problematic one. So this is where we are. So we have to also pay attention a little bit more how society perceives and how they are connected to their food tradition. Coming back to Finland and the Nordics, I'm optimistic.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you need to change the way Italy and France are looking at their food, because this might be quite it might be quite difficult. This means like a transformation of culture.
Okay.
Is this something you want to pursue or not?
As I said, my husband is a consumer scientist, and being a technologist, I say we have to change the people's attitudes. And then he really flashes to my face, who are you to change people?
Yes, exactly.
Because as a technologist, you always think, so yes, we have to work hard on that. But it's not going to be too easy, because everyone has their own opinions when it comes to what they eat, and that's a very strong opinion.
And if we talk about like loudening the voice, I know that in the Netherlands there's quite a discussion on how activistic are you allowed to be as a scientist, as a science institute. And there were even like television programs on who trying to expose scientists who are too activistic. How do you balance this in your case? Because for you, this is, of course, you can lobby whatever you want. But for you, it's probably it's hard. At least it can impact your reputation or not.
Well, I'll give you a recent example. Probably you are aware this huge discussion around minimally processed and ultra-processed foods. Yes, which really cracks my nerves as a scientist. Obviously, majority of those discussions makes absolute no sense. They are not really evidence-based. So, of course, as being a scientist, and I think that's also one of the strengths here in the Nordic region, there is huge public trust on research. That's not something that you find in everywhere. So here it's exceptional. There is huge public trust on what we research and on the evidence. So we have to use the research to advocate the transition.
Yeah, so it's really evidence-based advocacy. Yeah, but then again, still the question is how far can you push it? But you always have to this dynamic of
there has to be a balance, and of course everything comes together. In my talk, I have also referred to the food environment. The food environment should be supporting. Again, I'm optimistic from the Nordics because we have at least one day in the week in the schools. There is the vegetarian day, and then it's always offered. And then here we have also very nice school meal support. So these are the things that puts us exceptionally when compared to others in the EU.
So maybe.
Yeah, onto the trust piece very, very specifically, because I'm spending a lot of time philosophically understanding the Nordic capitalism in some ways, understanding and unbundling some stuff. And the most important piece that you touched base upon, which I think almost the whole world is struggling around, is trust as an infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And the problem is people have lost trust in public institutions, scientists and experts completely. A lot of parts of Western Europe is the same problem. I would argue where they have not lost trust is Nordics and East Asia up to some extent, Korea and Japan. And you actually look at the trust in the public institution, Nordics always are high. Netherlands is actually also quite high. But a lot of Western European countries, you look at Italy, Spain, and all of them also pretty bad in terms of public. One point on the culture piece also, which because I've been a reader of history quite a lot, is about Japan. Japan during Edo period, for 12 freaking centuries, there was no red meat. Now you go and talk to a Japanese, they won't be able to associate their food without red meat. So culture does evolve. I think it's up to us how we humanize the culture. And I think we need to proceed towards some sort of kindness to actually approach how we can actually humanize the culture. I don't have an answer, but historically, culture has never been constant. Actually, if you argue, go back to even Italian food also has evolved. Is our romanticism for, I think for 4 or 5 decades, this is our culture. It was not before. Like, before even like Nordics was, before Lutheran church came in, there was paganism. So I don't know, yeah. So my 2 cents on culture as it evolves.
Yeah, to add on that, I actually made a documentary on the history of tomato, and the pizza margherita was only invented in 1895. And now it's like the staple product of Italy. So that, and often that it keeps me quite optimistic. We can change it. How does GFI tackle this? Do you try to make?
So we mostly focus on like decision makers. That's where our primary kind of audience. And I was thinking as you were speaking about France, I mean, Italy we'll put to the side because Italy is a bit special. Their government is a bit special. But in France, for example, yes, the French government, I mean, this is just the inconsistency of politics as well, but the French government has said on one hand it wants to support Italy in proposing an EU ban of cultured meat, etc. But then on the other hand, it's investing in precision fermentation technology. So, I mean, it also depends which part of the government you speak to for a lot of this. And I think that's another challenge we have in the policy sphere is that often alternative proteins is put in the food and agricultural box, whereas really it's innovation, it's industry. So that's another ask we have for policymakers. If you support this, if you're in Finland, if you're in Lithuania, make sure it's not just the like they're not just having those debates in the agricultural ministries, but you bring those other ministries on board.
Making jobs.
Yeah, I mean, talking about, because again, going back to this letter, when we saw that 16 countries signed, including countries that we know are pretty supportive, we asked and they were like, oh, well, that was our agricultural minister doing that. But actually, if you speak to the economic industry or the economic ministry, then they're super supportive of this and they would never have signed it. So yeah, just to say it's complex. Like, I don't think you can take one country's position and say that's always going to be the country. Like, it also depends how much industry is in that country, whether they really see a potential for this. So I think we're still at the stage where this can go in different directions. And I don't think it's as simple as saying hostile versus non-hostile countries.
So maybe to follow up also on the earlier, you stated that you are already building a little bit of a coalition in the Nordics, but you're also quite optimistic. What are you trying to get out of it? What will be, if you made this Nordic coalition, what will be like the main focus point of push?
Yeah, I mean, Nesli and the Napkin team are doing most of the coordination piece, but for us, I think it comes down to 3 things. The first is R&D, and Nesli already presented our report earlier in this year. So the Nordic countries are consistently in the top 10 of R&D funders in this space. They're about 20% of all European R&D in alternative proteins, so a huge proportion of that. If you look at it per capita, they're top 5, basically all of them. So maintaining that level of funding so that the research ecosystem has that consistency. I echo everything Nesli said about the importance of early stage funding, open access funding, so you can really catalyze the space so that results aren't hidden behind IP. So the first thing would be maintaining the R&D funding and making sure it really goes to the most high impact things. And it's part of the work we do at GFI is really seeing where the technical bottlenecks are and making sure that the research that we do manage to get for alternative proteins really goes to solving those key hurdles that will elevate the entire sector on taste and price parity. So that's the first thing. The second thing we already talked about is infrastructure. That's going to be the next big challenge. We have just finished a piece of analysis that looks at fermentation alone and says that to get to kind of double-digit market penetration, we're going to need 70 times the amount of fermentation capacity we currently have, so investments in there. And then the third thing I've already mentioned is speaking up in Brussels and providing that counter voice.
And does this also help you then again, maybe like you were telling about investments are a little bit drying up? Does this help? So what is the exact dynamic between EU policy and VC investments?
Yeah, I would say it's it's kind of a very complicated time for the alternative protein space. So the 4 things that I was talking about that time, about the holy quadrity, I'll actually add the 5th puzzle piece also, investing. US has no money, has no interest in biotech, very little interest in climate at this point. And VCs are just looking to invest in AI, of course, ChatGPT. And Singapore at some point was putting a lot of money through their sovereign fund. Temasek is putting no money. At some point they put in like 500 million or something in cultivated meat, all gone bust almost. There is no ecosystem left in Singapore apart from you get an SFA approval. I'm just telling you the reality. What is interesting that I don't know where this is gonna go, but we are seeing still a lot of interest from whether from EIF at the EIF level. We are seeing a lot of interest from a lot of sovereign funds, specifically in Nordics. Nordics has one specific peculiarity in some ways that they have in Denmark and Sweden and Norway have a lot of industrial foundations. Like I have this very interesting stat that I was reading about industrial foundations in Denmark. Close to 50% of R&D budget comes from the industrial foundations. What are these industrial foundations? So Novo Nordisk is structured as a foundation. Carlsberg is structured as a foundation. So they are actually rotating a lot of money, and they have been creating a lot of food and bioclusters. PDT, for example, is doing so much research there. Denmark is trying to bring in capital. Actually, Tessie has been investing quite a lot here in sovereign fund, has been investing quite a lot. So we see hope from there, but there is very little private capital moving, which is also a bit of a complicated situation for funds like us, that we are also planning to raise new funds, where we should be going, blah, blah, blah. Part of the thing that actually we are spending quite a lot of time, and I'm doing a little bit of scanning also to actually think about Nordics and Benelux focus funds. So we're thinking of Nordics and this Northern European belt, because we see innovators, we see there is capital moving, and there are actually a lot of frugality in how people are actually building companies. And we have seen that with a lot of precision fermentation companies as a very high level example. I'll give you how capital efficient they are. A US company needs to raise 100 million, a German or French company is raising 20 million for the same amount of work a Nordic company is doing in 3 or 5 million. So that is quite fascinating to me in terms of capital efficiency.
Yeah, just to give a stat, because just to illustrate how little money has gone to the alternative protein space compared to other technology. So I read this yesterday. So if you think just about cultivated meat, total all-time private investment has been 3 billion. In 2024, in the first 6 months, electric vehicles raised more than that. So that just gives you an idea, like we're still at such a small scale in terms of how oiled and funded this space is. And that's just private. I mean, public is completely different.
Last 2 years almost must have been negligible. Yeah. This all money was going in 21, 22, and then I was like, oh, it's
What
gone.
is the reason for it?
Yeah, but it doesn't.
What is the reason I would be, and I was talking in my last, there was a lot of pipe dreams shown by entrepreneurs, and there was a lot of over-optimism of unicorn dreams. There was too much hype. Company raised way too much capital, and I'm actually seeing live, without taking the examples, $300 million, $400 million precision fermentation company from US getting restructured at 20 million. A $600 million company getting restructured at 200 million. So
maybe from my understanding, you were comparing it to the EVs, and maybe I'm not sure if you know, but the EV, of course, now is a more mature market. Did it have the same problems when it started? Is this like a general startup thing or not? Is there something special about it?
I'll just say one thing: Tesla is still overhyped.
Can we take some questions?
Yeah, it's almost time. Let's open up the discussion, and I see a raised hand there.
I can also just talk. But
Yeah.
We keep talking about Tesla, and I think that it's a good analogy, not so much now, but a good analogy in the sense of before electric cars used to be seen as like slow, ugly, only like the most green, sort of crunchy granola person was going to drive them, and then Tesla made it sexy, right? It was an upscale luxury car that went super quick, and people wanted to be a part of this sort of lifestyle of sexy electric vehicles. What is this sort of sex appeal, sexiness for cultivated meat that we need to get to, whether it's a particular dish or food that we feel will be like the breakthrough beyond the pink slime, so to say.
One quick answer, I'll be very honest. It was not just sex appeal of Tesla, but it was shitload of subsidies. Yes. Is anybody giving subsidies to cellular?
Absolutely.
Tesla made, actually, so Tesla earnings, if you go and try to analyze the financial statements, it is actually earning positive still because of subsidies. And I think we cannot deny that. Maybe in new mature industries, you need to have patient capital, you need to have government support, and I don't know how, but subsidies play a huge role, probably.
And still, like, I'm not a panelist, but still, I'm always hoping that like, foods can be quite hyped, even novel foods. Like in Amsterdam now, Korean food is all the hype. And so we can also maybe not try to rebrand or try to remake meat, but make all these fantastic new tastes and which might even might even hype it more up than trying to mimic meat. I don't know if this works, but.
Just on the kind of which products can maybe cut through. I mean, you mentioned the gourmet foie gras. I think that's a good example. I mean, that's like at the end of the spectrum on like cognitive dissonance. Like you like the taste, but you don't think about how it's made. So that could be an example of like these kind of, also it makes sense from a price perspective and an economics perspective. But yeah, maybe just to state again that like you were asking about the comparison with EVs. I mean, food is a very different kind of scale of economics. So I think that is the key hurdle in terms of you need high volume, low cost, and maybe that is ultimately where the comparison kind of frays a little bit. But I think the principles are absolutely correct.
Sorry. Nesli, and then we need to finish because then Teemu wants to say a few words, the chair of Finland. But I mean, you are all staying at the evening reception, so you can ask the panelists questions in there as well.
So the closing words.
Yeah, I have been waiting for this. Yeah, coming back to the Tesla again, and then reflecting from Tesla back to the food. Of course, we are here after making a dietary shift. Okay, we are not talking about a tiny functional protein. If I give an example, heme, okay, it's an important protein and so on and so forth, but it's not going to make a huge climate impact there. So we have to look at the core macro protein here. And I would say as simple as, I mean, what would be the sexy thing there? It has to be appealing. I mean, you can make very sustainable, very nutritious products. It can be even cheap. But then if it's not tasty, people will try it once and then it will disappear. So taste is, of course, important, affordability. And then coming back to the discussions with the scalability, I think we have still relatively good funding for the early stage, but then the value of that, which is quite critical, we are really lagging behind when it comes to scaling up, and especially in the SALEX space, we are really lacking the infrastructure. I think that's really one of the biggest hurdles. I will not go to the regulatory side.
Thank you. One short.
I think we need to think beyond just venture capital money. I think we need to think about different financing mechanism. And I was discussing with GFI Europe, Helen, I think you guys have put together innovative financing mechanisms. I think we really need to think different mechanisms.
Thanks. Yeah, let me finish off. I was actually just yesterday getting a graph that in the late 1900s, 6% of the GDP went to new railroads because it was so important, and so many subsidies and so many government spending was going to something that they thought was really the future. And this is something also all different kinds of money has to flow in this, and then we'll make it work. Thank you.
Thank you, Hidde, and the amazing panelists.